This happened when I was 10 or 11 years old, so it would be around 1978 or 1979. While I was younger, I was involved with the church, and this happened one Sunday morning while I was helping set up for Mass. I was the only one in the building setting up when I heard a loud bang coming from the choir loft at the other end of the building. Curious, I stepped out from where I was and called out, "Hello," and there was no answer. So, I figured that the person just didn't hear me and was doing what they needed to do in order to get ready. I was looking up towards the choir loft to see if I could see the person. There was no one there, and I figured that something had just fallen down and the noise just echoed throughout the church. Right then and there, I had the feeling that I wasn't alone. Normally, I wouldn't have minded because I figured that the organist came in early to get ready, but this was different. I had this uneasy feeling that not only was my life in jeopardy, but my soul. It was a fear that I've never felt before or since. As I was looking up at the choir loft, I couldn't see anyone, yet I could sense that there was something up there. It then appeared to me. It was a shapeless and formless figure, but it was exuding or giving off this evil that just penetrated through me like a sound would at a concert if you were standing too close to the amps. What I felt went way beyond the fight or flight reaction people talk about when faced in a situation like this. I was frozen there, beyond being scared, and my mind didn't process things for a few seconds. Then all of a sudden, I guess my mind snapped me back to reality, and I just ran and took off out of the church and stayed there until I saw the priest come out of the rectory and started going over to the church. I didn't realize how far I ran until I started walking back to the church. I had run about 100 to 150 feet from the church. When the priest had seen me fully dressed to take part in Mass and seen how freaked out I was, he asked me what had happened. So I told him what happened and what I had seen and felt. He tried to reassure me that it was probably my imagination, that it was an old church and that it might have just been something falling or something mechanical. The thing is that I've been in that building long enough to know the sounds of the mechanical devices and the way they kick off. Another thing is, I would know that my imagination wouldn't give me that life-threatening feeling, or being able to tell that there was something giving off such an evil that reverberated throughout my body. I've always been a skeptical person, even since I was this age, and not only that, I've never let my mind get the better of me. I've never lost my faith in God and His advisory, and I feel that this one was some kind of evil spirit or demon, and since that day, whenever I went into that church, I always made sure that there would be someone else there, so I wouldn't have to come across that thing again.
So this happened in February or late January of 2015. I and my friends decided to try urban exploring. I wasn't really in the condition to walk or run because I had recently suffered a pretty intense concussion. Alright, so we decided to park on the opposite side of the asylum. The photo you see in the thumbnail is a small church or school-like building on a small path leading to the asylum. I'm not certain if it was part of it, but it most likely was. The entirety of that building was caved in, so the chance of us exploring it was very little. We didn't have any rope or anything to pull us up. We decided to continue onward, and through some incredibly thick forest and brush, we had to climb over a massive tree on the only animal path in our sight. The more and more we walked, the eerier the atmosphere became. I saw something white out of the corner of my eye, and man, was I not disappointed. White notes, paper sheets, just random paper sheets strewn throughout the immediate forest before the asylum. I swear to God, it felt like the Slender Man game. I'll attach photos to the comments. Besides my buddy T being spooked, me and S were in high spirits. Bandanas on our face, knife in our hands, along with flashlights and our phones. We wore all black hoodies, except for T in the thumbnail. As we passed the notes and reached the end of the forest, we saw the eeriness of the biggest building on asylum grounds. It had abandoned semi-trailers there to rust there for eternity. I ran as fast as we could to the building to stay in cover. As we reached the first half of the huge building, we turned on our flashlights and walked inside. I saw the beds those children died on. I saw disgusting rooms with pillows and beds strewn about. I'm a firm atheist, but that place made me feel uncomfortable, incredibly uncomfortable. There was lots of graffiti too. Some disrespectful, others commenting on the duality of men. Some of it was the N-word and swastikas. And penises too. Me and S just felt so pumped and alert, like movie stars sneaking around. Fuck, I'm not gonna lie, I absolutely loved the rush that asylum brought. Now as T took more pictures, and me and S cracked jokes about him being scared, we ran into a huge room. A completely dark room. The other rooms were fairly well lit, with windows being removed and sunlight glowing through. But this room was something dark. Just incredibly dark. It had snowed about 1 week prior, and the snow was almost completely melted. This day it was easily 55 to 60 degrees. There was a huge ice pillar, something out of a video game. I was too confused to actually focus on anything else at the moment. It was just confusing. I understood that ice won't melt in the shade, but the sheer massive size of this pillar from roof to ceiling of at least 12 feet and a tree trunk around in circumference. That's when it dawned on me. Maybe I didn't fully understand it at the time, but a few things that wouldn't really happen anywhere else happened at that place. After being spooked enough of icy dark rooms, we climbed onto the roof and saw the melted snow in a huge, watery pile seeping through, looking like if it was just going to collapse at any moment. We didn't dare walk past the dry areas of the roof, and we decided to get off a different way. So we explored the biggest building, and now we were on our way to the main building. I circled it in blue in an attached photo. As we enter the decrepit, ancient building, it's the ice room all over again. The doors were rusted and broken, rooms tossed and ransacked. I climbed up onto a level by myself, since the staircase was blocked by some desk and wall shelves. I found nothing but sand in the staircase landing. This is in the middle of Maryland, not near any beach, and this staircase was covered in sand. It wasn't concrete, it wasn't crushed rock, it was fine sand. It belonged on a shitty Maryland beach. I was terrified and spoke to S and T through a hole on the floor I was on. They told me I needed to go down there. Apparently they had seen a security guard roaming. I climbed over the metal barrier in the landing, climbed down and met up with S and T. We went out a window on the first floor and hid behind some random metal barrels or something of that sort, and we saw the car drive away. T was so fucking nervous and I started panicking. That's when him and S took off in a sprint. I chased after them, being a slower runner than them but still in pretty competent shape. As soon as we got to the forest, I was about 50 yards deep from the edge touching the asylum grounds. They were about another 50 yards away from me. I saw the groundskeeper. He didn't stop chasing after us. We ran so fast through the thicket, jumping over branches, avoiding the giant tree, and watching out for the abandoned building back to S's car. We all got into the car and drove. There was no word said. All of our heartbeats were through the roof. I can never replicate how amazing and equally terrifying that day was. Weeks of research into this place was hyping me and S up. The place, Forest Haven, was a local asylum and institution for people with mental and intelligence disabilities. From what I've read on it, is that they committed a Haitian woman with an intelligence deficit. She wasn't able to speak English, and they thought it would be easier to commit her to the asylum and forget. More atrocities that happened there involved dozens of patients strapped into beds, with the restraints altering the bones to the point they looked deformed with birth defects. A lot of kids and mentally impaired adults died from asphyxiation. I'll put more links in the description with articles related to it. I'm talking more about my experience and just needed to set up the context.
"4 years and a lesser income ago, my family of then two moved out of our dinky apartment and decided to rent a house. We found one for rent by a rather immense church that was across the street from the hospital my wife worked at. Thinking of our wee one that was only a few months old, this meant she could nurse easily. We did have a couple of misgivings about this house, like the gaping crawl spaces in the basement that were creepy as hell to get out, and an entire room infested with spiders and bugs thanks to another crawl space. However, we sealed the holes with reflective insulation, sprayed the heck out of it for bugs, and avoided the basement unless doing laundry. It was our first experience having space for our kids, a real dining room and living room, so we were excited. I worked nights and my wife worked days, so I took care of the kids during the day and worked until midnight. One night, while I was working my data entry crap, my wife called me in a panic saying that the doorbell had gone off. Now this was an old doorbell that actually rang bells to play a charming little tune. I quirked an eyebrow and made a joke, but then she said it wasn't the same tune. It was something discordant. Around this time, my oldest started getting scared at night. I pawned it off as faulty old wiring and thought little of it. One day, playing with my older son and watching my little one shake the crap out of his toys, I got to hear it. The entity caused, or not, it may have been a cold chill down my spine. I shook it off, but when I saw the shadow of someone walking upstairs at the corner of my eye, I froze and immediately thought, it's my poor eyesight or maybe a floater in my eye that I caught. Then, my oldest, then 3, says, "Was that Mama?" That was it. Time for a walk. Get the wagon, hope your diapers are clean, I might need a diaper too. Let's go outside in the happy sunshine and I'll try not to run or whatever, but we're going now. The bell did not stop. After that, it would ring with the same discordant tune in the dead of night. We made jokes on how it seemed vaguely similar to parts of the Oscar Mayer Wiener song. We were poor and we couldn't afford to move. We ended up having to move regardless as the church decided to sell it without letting us know, and we had to get out. Luckily, we ended up finding an apartment opening at a nice place next door to a wacko who was massing with guns and explosives. The funny part is that we moved into the first place to get away from wackos. What do you think?
Before I start, I'll give you some background information. I'm a 14-year-old male from Victoria, Australia. I live around a half hour from Greenlawn, which is about an hour from Melbourne. My area is what is considered the country. I also have a large reserve only about a block from my house. This story takes place around 2 weeks ago. I was home alone on a Saturday night and my mom and dad were in Melbourne for a business meeting. My sister was with her boyfriend and would be home later. I was in the lounge room watching Netflix when I heard a thunk on the front veranda. It was too early for my sister to be home, so I thought it was the neighbor's dog. He sometimes jumps the fence and comes looking for food or something to play with. I went to the front door and looked through the window to the side. It was not the dog. There was a tall figure, maybe 210 centimeters tall, which is about 7 feet for you Americans. It had goat's legs covered in gray fur with black hooves and bright yellow eyes, which looked right back at me. I ran back to the living room in blind panic. What the fuck was that? I thought. In a random idea, I grabbed my phone and started playing the loudest song I could find, which happened to be Hero by Jonathan Young. This was an attempt to either scare or lure the beast away. Then I heard a window smash behind me. I ran to the kitchen to grab something to protect myself, which ended up being a cleaver. This thing started sliding down the hall towards the room I was in, and it was probably 30 seconds, but it felt like hours, waiting for that thing to appear. Finally, I spotted its glowing eyes in the darkness and ran at it swinging. I felt my knife stab into something and I pushed it deeper, while twisting. The creature screamed in pain and pulled back, running away and jumping out of the window. I spent the next 3 hours locked in my room with 2 knives and a torch next to me. When my sister came home later, she asked what was wrong, but I just stuttered, "Window, goat stab," over and over. My sister came out with me to look around and we found large hoof prints in the hall and in the yard. We stayed together the entire night. I still heard the clapping of its feet every night just outside my window, probably looking for what hurt it, or a new way in. It hasn't come back for a few days, and I'm hoping that I never see it again.
We're Catholic, and in the town I lived there was a Catholic church that kept its doors open 24 hours a day, so people could go pray. A little after 2:15 a.m., we were walking and decided to go in. We entered the church through the front and made our way to the stairs facing the altar. We knelt on the stairs and began praying. After about 5 minutes, I heard the side door to my right slam shut. In a quiet church at 2:30 a.m., that is super loud. We both spun in that direction and saw nothing. Before we could speak, the distinct sound of running footsteps emanated from the front of the side door, then made their way towards the front entrance behind us. It was so quiet, otherwise we could follow the sound with our eyes. The footstep ran past the front entrance. If they were human, it would have to be on their left, to the stairs that lay to our right as we faced the front. They ascended the stairs, and all sound ceased. We looked right at each other, dumbfounded and unsure of what to say. Suddenly, the church bells began to ring, and I instinctively looked over to my watch. It was 2:30. Breaking our silence, I remarked that they must have always rang at 2:30, and I never noticed it before. We sat there for maybe 90 seconds, discussing what had happened, when suddenly 2 police officers walked into the church. The police station is 2 buildings from the church. One of the officers asked if we had rung the bells. "No," I replied. "We were praying. If we had, we wouldn't have had time to make it back to the altar before you got here." He realized that was true, and the 2 officers walked up to the stairs and then climbed back down. My girlfriend and I sat there waiting for them. Maybe after about 2 minutes they came back down and announced that not only had they not seen anyone, but the door leading to the bells was padlocked from the outside. "Did you guys see anyone?" the same officer asked. "These bells never ring at 2:30. We both replied that we hadn't, and I wasn't going to mention ghostly footsteps, and they thanked us and told us to be careful, and left. Till this day, I have no idea what we heard, but we both remember it happening to this day. What do you guys think?
So my story isn't a typical story. And I'm not sure how you'd categorize it other than folklore or maybe cryptid. So a few years ago, I and a boyfriend broke up, and he started dating a girl that in our small town was a self-proclaimed witch, or lechuza in Hispanic folklore, is a shapeshifter. She would hold parties that involved certain rituals and sacrifices. She had many cats that would die mysteriously. And if you know anything about cats, it's that they die easily. She had about 5 cats die within a year, just randomly, with no real explanation. Anyway, I often had vivid dreams when I was younger. This time I fell asleep on the couch. I had a very vivid dream about this same girl. She had this evil expression on her face, and she had spoken to me. It felt like she was delivering a direct message. So when I woke up, I told my mom that I needed to talk to her, but didn't want to speak about it in front of my dad or boyfriend since they disregard the supernatural. We drove to a gas station a few miles down the road from our subdivision, and I explained the dream. We spoke about it for about 20 minutes before returning to the house. On the way back, on a street before mine, I saw a dark figure on the side of the road. I leaned in, focusing on it, since it caught my attention. Now, most times, I disregard it just as a person walking, but But this was different. It was like something was forcing me to notice. It was maybe 2 feet tall and suddenly turned to face me. When it did, I realized it was an owl. But it was too large to be an owl, and the face was like a woman's. It had pale skin, its eyes were human-like, but they had no color or white to them. It had a hooked beak, like a bird. This thing's eyes were pitch black and pierced right through me. It freaked me the fuck out. I was instantly filled with dread and overwhelming fear. I began panicking, asking if my mom had seen it too. She said no. She stopped the car and reversed. I looked back in the meantime, but I didn't see it anymore. My heart dropped in my stomach when I didn't see it. I would have felt better knowing where it had gone. It all happened in slow motion for me, but in reality, it took all of 10 seconds to pass by. We sat there for a few minutes as I explained what I saw, but my mom said she never saw it. She explained to me what it was exactly, and how her dad, my grandpa, had shown one to her and her siblings when they were kids. They fly around and whistle like a human would, and if you whistle back, you're answering it, and it'll come after you. I wish I could say that's all that happened, but it wasn't. Later that night, around 11 or so, me and my boyfriend were watching a movie when we heard a loud thud on the roof. We looked at each other like, what the fuck? He muted the TV and we listened for a few seconds. We could hear something moving around. It sounded like scratching noises or scraping against the roof. I began crying and telling him what happened earlier. I hadn't told him because I thought he'd think I was imagining things. Him being a skeptic of the supernatural. He got up, and because our room was at the front of the house, exited our room and walked past our foyer and out the front door. He backed into the driveway and looked up at the roof, but said whatever it was gone by now. We never figured it out, but it was very strange and a creepy occurrence. It haunts me to this very day.
I'm an 18-year-old female. I've been stalked quite a few times in my life, but thankfully, most of the perpetrators were annoying rather than scary. These two individuals never got to bloom into full stalkers due to the fact that I moved out of state. They were easily the creepiest individuals I'd ever met. I'd begun to attend a community college, and in an effort to make friends, joined an anime club. Once a month, we'd scrape together enough money for pizza and soda, reserve a room in the library, and spend the day watching everyone's favorites. Everything was great until the second meeting. We watched Princess Mononoke and Kiki's Delivery Service and some other similar movies. Then, Chad put in the last movie of the day. It was animated softcore porn. None of us knew what to do. We were all kind of socially awkward. He sat through our movies quietly and politely. We were supposed to do the same. We spent the hour and 20 minutes red-faced and casting at each other horrified looks, while Chad watched the porn with rapt attention. Finally, it was over and he turned around. "What did you guys think?" he asked. He was looking directly at me. That was the first time I noticed that I was the only female in anime club. Trying to be polite, I made a huge mistake. It was, interesting? I meant it to convey his choice was interesting, considering that we'd all brought in Disney movies, but he took it to mean I was fascinated with creepy porn. From that day on, he showed up everywhere I went on campus. The second I entered any sort of common room, there he was with his laptop, trying to show me anime porn, seating himself way, way too close to me so he could lean in and try to watch it with me. Each time I would tell him, "I don't really like this show," as politely as I could, and move to another table, but he would move right back uncomfortably close to me and assure me that I would get into the story if I just watched. One day he sat down next to me with his laptop and I heaved a sigh of relief. He pulls out a notebook and shows me a drawing. It was really creepy. It looked like a robot uterus. Hoping I'm wrong, I asked what it is. It's a creepy robot uterus. He's writing a book about an AI sex toy that invades lady parts and turns them into ravening sex fiends willing to do anything for the D. He wants my opinion on his story. I told him it wasn't really my kind of story and tried to move again. He followed and began asking me really inappropriate questions in the name of research. Thankfully, at this point, Vincent, the boy who'd brought me into Anime Club, noticed that Chad was following me table by table through the lunchroom as I turned even redder with embarrassment and came over. Chad fled before he could even speak. Chad was afraid of Vincent. Oh, thank God. Vincent was awesome and always in the lunchroom. I could just hang out near his anti-Chad force field. Vincent played World of Darkness with his friends in the lunchroom, and I had played all through high school. By proximity, I was eventually asked to join the game. I met with the storyteller, Paul, and gave him my character sheet. He informed me that I could keep whatever stats I had, but I was going to be taking over the role of Jenny, a long-standing NPC. I asked who Jenny was, but was only told I would get a huge kick out of it, so I attended, waiting for him to introduce me to the team. They were playing the game in a seedy strip club setting. Everyone looked bored but Paul and a player named Bill, who were wrapped up in the ordering of a pen and paper hooker. I didn't know Bill, but he was huge and creepy, with an intense, unblinking stare that was always focused either on Paul or me. I started to get a bad feeling. Then Paul announces Jenny the hooker has arrived to service Bill's character. He turns to me and grins lewdly. Bill's searing focus locks onto me. "I'm not playing a hooker," I yell. Paul looks crestfallen. Bill looks enraged. "Dude, just let her play the bartender." Vincent sighs when Paul begins pressuring me. Paul eventually relents, sulking. I finished that game and showed up for one more, but Paul insisted on sexualizing my character, and Bill just sat there across from me, both games breathing heavily and glaring. I quit the game. Bill started following me, and he never spoke to me, just sat across the room from me, glaring and snorting. With Chad. They were friends, of course they were. I had to abandon the cafeteria entirely, because while Chad was creepy, I was pretty sure Bill was dangerous, and he wasn't afraid of Vincent. Also, it really looked like Chad was encouraging him to do something while they stared at me whispering. I left the state at the end of the semester, but kept in touch with Vincent. About 7 years later, I married him. When I brought up all the crazy things that happened back when we met, he told me that actually everyone was afraid of Bill, particularly Paul. They tried to disband the game because all Bill wanted to do was rent fake hookers, but he'd made veiled threats that he might do something insane if they stopped playing with him. This day, I think Paul was offering me to Bill the same way you offer a crazy guy at the office a Snickers, just in the chance that if he does do something drastic, he won't do it to you.
I would like to start off by saying that this experience is 100% real. Whether you believe in these things or not is for you to decide. But I was a skeptic too. Then my life and perspective on what could really be out there changed forever. Being raised in a family of truck drivers, naturally upon graduating high school in 2011, I too became a truck driver right out of high school, just like my dad and uncles. I started out hauling pulpwood logs in Louisiana, but after I turned 21, I got a job driving for a flatbed company out of Tulsa in 2014. I had been driving over the road for about a year. Driving is mostly just boring. You spend 80% of your life in your truck wishing you were home. One night in late August, I was delivering to Salt Lake City from Denver. I took the I-70 west until coming to Highway 191 in Utah at around 2 a.m. I decided to take this way because I had never been down the road before and my truck's GPS indicated it was a safe route to be on. I didn't deliver until 3 p.m., so it wasn't going to be out of my way. I'm driving along this highway listening to music and chatter on the CB when, out of nowhere, the CB begins emitting an intense, high-pitched squealing noise that lasted for about 15 seconds. Thinking it was just interference, which is pretty normal on a CB. A few minutes pass and again the noise blasts. This time louder, but only for a few short seconds. I blew this off as interference as well, but was getting a little annoyed, so I turned my CB down a little, but enough I could still hear faint chatter. What seemed like only 2 to 3 minutes had passed, and out of nowhere, my near-mute radio blasted the same noise, but at a deafening volume. Now I'm becoming concerned because, like I said, I turned it down to near whisper, and it was putting out this strange noise at movie theater levels. The noise lasted for what felt like a full minute, and as soon as it ceased, an array of rhythmic clicking and popping sounds came out of the speaker. This lasted almost 3 minutes, causing me to become distracted trying to figure out what was wrong. When I couldn't get the noise to stop, I tried turning the radio off completely, but to no avail. The noises continued for what must have been another 2 minutes. By this time I had found a small spot just big enough to pull off the road to disconnect this demonic CB completely in hopes it would help. I got the radio wires disconnected and placed it on my bunk to stow away upon arriving at my delivery spot. As soon as I set it down and turned around to sit back in the driver's seat, I noticed a set of glowing orangish-red eyes staring menacingly through a bush at my truck. Something in me screamed, "Put the fucking truck in gear and get as far from this thing as possible." But my body wouldn't respond to my brain's commands. I was frozen and becoming increasingly more terrified with each second. The area around me became deathly quiet. I couldn't hear my truck's engine or the music anymore. I was transfixed on this set of eyes which never blinked or looked away from me from the truck. What felt like forever passed, and out of the silence the CB that lay on my bed blew up in the clicks and pops and gurgling noises, scaring me to the point I almost shit myself. I jumped and looked at the radio as soon as my eyes rested on it. It cut off. Turning back around to see if the eyes were still there, what I saw was something I could only describe as a Stephen King topic. This thing stood on 2 legs, with a skeletal-like body wrapped in leathery-looking skin. Its face was contorted with empty, hollow eyes, a small, almost non-existent nose, and a mouth void of lips, exposing its large, sharp-pointed teeth. It stood maybe 20 feet from the front of the truck, staring through the windshield at me. I began to shake, tremble, and the feeling of nausea quickly arose. I felt myself begin to throw up when the CB lets out a brief screech, and then a very intense growl comes through like that of a wolf or bear or some other apex predator. The being began slowly moving toward the truck, and it was this moment I felt like I was in imminent danger. My brain screamed again, "Get the fuck in the driver's seat, put the fucking truck in gear, and get the fuck out of here." This time my legs responded to the movement. I quickly fell into the seat, slamming my foot down on the clutch and thrusting the shifter into second gear as if I was trying to rip it out of the floor. I stomped on the gas, turning back onto the road, frantically trying to shift gears, but my nerves were so out of whack I missed fifth, causing me to panic more. I drove and I didn't stop until reaching Salt Lake City. I pulled into the Love's truck stop and nervously walked inside, still shaking. I must have been visibly nervous because the cashier asked if everything was okay. I told her no and explained what happened. She said she knew the area I was in was a hotbed for UFO and other sightings. That what I had seen could have been a skinwalker. After that night, I never went back down Highway 191, and if all possible, tried to avoid any loads going towards it.
This happened to me in college when I lived with my roommate, Michelle. It was our freshman year, and our dorm building had 4 different wings, and 2 were boys and 2 were girls. Our wing was connected by another by a door down the hall, which led to a boys' wing. All floors in each wing were the same sex, and boys only had access to the girls' wings through the connecting door, which you had to have a key card for. They were locked at all times, and the key cards only worked for that dorm. I had known Michelle for a long time, and we loved the girls on our floor. We would all hang out often, and during the week and sometimes weekends, whoever would be home would leave their door open so we could stop in, hang out, and whatever. We never had a problem, and sometimes guys would take shortcuts to their wing from campus through our floor. No big deal, and we got to know the guys who did this often. Most often they all said hey if our doors were open and continued on their way. One day, our friend April got quiet when there were about 6 of us in our room, and I noticed. I asked her what was the matter, and she said, "Dude, did you not see that guy that walked by? I've seen him before. He's so fucking creepy, and he never says anything. He just stares at us." We all looked at each other and said no. She shrugged and said if he came by again, she would let us know. About an hour later, after watching some reality show, she hits Michelle in the arm. We all look up, and there is a tall guy with longer hair, wearing all black, walking slowly by. He says nothing and just stares at us, but looks away when we all look up. He leaves and we all look at each other. We chalk it up to him being lost since we haven't seen him before, and resume watching TV. I talked to Michelle later that night though, and we agreed to keep a lookout and let the rest of the girls know to do the same just in case. We begin to see this guy on the floor all the time, sometimes multiple times a day. It began to get ridiculous when we would all be changing and getting ready to go out, and he would walk by 3 to 4 times, doing nothing but staring and walking slower than necessary. Once, he walked by 6 times and we moved on to the room to shut the doors. He clearly lived in the building, because his keycard worked on the locked door, and he would be there daily. We began feeling uncomfortable leaving our doors open, even when there were multiple people home, and doing so. We asked the guys we knew that across the hall on our floor if he lived there. They said no he didn't, and they actually got concerned when he told us that, because we didn't know what was going on. One of the RAs on one of the guys' floors said if it continued or got weirder, to talk to our RA. He offered to try to find out where this dude lived for us. I'd like to say it didn't get weirder, but it did. One day, I went to our dorm computer room to print off some notes for a psych class and prep a project I was going to turn in for the end of the week. Creepy bro sits next to me and starts surfing the net as I'm sitting down to do my thing on the computer. I felt ice cold. Everyone had laptops before tablets were a thing, and it felt odd he arrived almost the exact same time. I printed my shit off and left quickly. I head to my psych class, and as I get to the psych building and walk to my class, I notice he followed me. I was stressed out the entire class and left from a different exit in the lecture hall. He was still milling around as I left, and hoped to God that he didn't see me as I practically ran home. I get back, breathless, and Michelle asks what's wrong. I tell her and she looks spooked. I go, "What?" And she shows me her Facebook. Creepy guy friended her, and his name is listed as Juan, and the photo is him in his underwear. I check mine and same fucking thing. We knock on a few girls' doors. 6 other people also got friended. We said nope to that, practically pounded our RA's door down and said what had been going on, and I told her what had just happened to me at class. One of the other girls swore he followed her as well. She panicked and he said that she blocked him online and she would take care of it. After that, we never saw him again, and we don't know what they did, but he wasn't on our floor the rest of the year, and never really found out where he lived in the building. Our RA told us later that there wasn't anyone named Juan in the entire building. So Juan, let's not ever meet again.
This happened back when all those clown sightings were going around. Honestly, I thought it was all just a bunch of shit, until I saw one. The town I stay in is very small, so I wasn't expecting this craze to be picked up. I assumed it was going to stay in the big cities around me and eventually fizzle out. Sadly, I was mistaken. The first time I saw Bozo, that's what I'll be referring to him as, was one morning when I was walking to work. I was about halfway there when I came up to the crosswalk and waited for the light to turn so I could go. On the other side of the street, however, I could see Bozo standing behind some bushes. He was in the parking lot of an abandoned factory. I tried to brush off the creepy vibes I was getting from him and just crossed the street as I normally would. Once I was close enough, I called out, "Nice costume, dumbass," and kept walking. I told a few coworkers about it, and they all agreed it was probably some dude with too much time on his hands. That night while walking home, however, I saw him again. He was in the same spot he was that morning. If I didn't know any better, I would have said he never moved all day. It was eerie as hell, the way he just stood there. He was so stoic. The only thing that moved was his head that turned to watch me as I passed by, and the balloons he was holding that blew around in the wind. I made it home fine and went to bed soon after. That morning I woke up to get ready for work, mentally preparing myself to come in contact with Bozo again. What I didn't prepare for was the red balloon that was floating in my kitchen when I went to make coffee. I live alone, for the record, and all my doors were locked. Bozo was the immediate suspect, but why was he targeting me? All I did was call him an asshole in passing. Does that really warrant a home invasion for some stupid prank? I popped the stupid thing. I said fuck the coffee and went on about my day. Surprisingly enough, Bozo wasn't standing behind the bushes today. He was gone. I continued trying to convince myself that this was some elaborate prank brought on by one of my asshole coworkers, but we didn't know each other that well. We'd went out for drinks a time or two, but they'd never been to my house. A couple days passed, and stranger things started to take place. I found a clown nose in my toilet one day, a balloon tied to my bedpost, and finally, there was confetti sprinkled all throughout my house. That last one had to have happened while I was at work, because I came home to it. The other two had happened overnight. This was getting out of hand. Someone was clearly fucking with me, and even if it was a stupid prank, the guy had broken in at least 3 times at this point. I went up to the police station and convinced an officer to come back with me and check the place out. He said that from what he could tell, whoever was doing it was extremely smart. The locks had been picked instead of pried open, and he must have worn gloves, as there were no prints on the knob other than my own. I told him about Bozo, and as expected, he looked at me like I was nuts. He saw how freaked I was, and agreed that if someone had clearly broken in, he would watch my house for the night. He parked across the street in a neighboring driveway and scoped it out until about 3 a.m. I was woken up by the sirens whooping once and the lights flashing over the windows. Looking out my window, I saw the officer had someone in custody. He held them to the ground and cuffed them. I knew then that it was safe to go outside. The officer put the gun in his car, then came to talk to me. He said that Bozo stood outside for about 10 minutes before finally heading up to the front door. As soon as he started to pick the lock, the officer stepped in. He said that Bozo didn't fight or protest, and responded well to his orders. The question of why still lingered in my head, however. According to the officer, Bozo wouldn't talk. He refused to even utter his name. Bozo was taken in, dressed as a clown, mind you, and was fingerprinted, charged, and booked. Turns out he really was just some random guy who thought it would be funny to mess around with someone. He had a record dating back 10 years, with basically nothing but robbery and breaking and entering charges. That would explain how he got into my house so easily. I've since upgraded my security, and have had no more issues with clowns, or burglary for that matter. I just hope it stays that way.